We live in a world where silence feels like a mistake, where every moment demands a reaction, a post, a comment, a confession. If you're not speaking, you must be hiding. If you're not sharing, you must be irrelevant. And if you're quiet, they assume you're weak. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if, in the age of noise, silence is the only real power left? Look around. Everyone's talking. In meetings, voices stack on top of each other like collapsing towers. Online, everyone's life is a broadcast, every thought a performance. Even in private, we feel the pull to explain, to justify, to speak, just to fill the space, to prove we exist, to prove we're right, to prove we belong. And yet the ones who win, the ones who truly control the room, aren't always the loudest. They're often the ones who say the least, and say it last, because real influence doesn't shout. It waits, and when the moment comes, it speaks just once, and everyone listens. Why? Because we've confused volume with value. We've mistaken constant communication for competence. We've accepted a lie, that to be visible we must be audible, that the person who talks most has the most to say. But history, psychology, and strategy all point to something else. They point to silence. Not passive silence, not timid retreat, but strategic, calculated, weaponized silence. The kind that makes people lean in, the kind that creates space and then controls what fills it, the kind that says, I see more than you think, I know more than I'm saying, and when I speak, you'll realize how little you understood. Silence, when chosen, is never absence, its presence intensified. In a world addicted to instant expression, the ability to say nothing is no longer a weakness, it's an edge. So ask yourself, what would happen if you spoke a little less, if you allowed the silence to breathe for you, if you stopped giving away your thoughts before they were ready? Would people forget you? Or would they start wondering what you're not saying? Silence is not the absence of communication. It is a strategy of it. We've been taught to fear silence, to interpret it as emptiness, hesitation, or weakness. But in truth, silence, when chosen, is one of the most potent expressions of control. It says, I don't need to convince you. I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to prove that I'm here. Because I already know I am. In a room full of noise, the one who chooses not to speak immediately redefines the atmosphere. They create a vacuum, and in that vacuum, tension builds, focus shifts. Suddenly, people listen, not to what is said, but to what might be said, to what the silence means, and that is power. Strategic silence isn't about being passive or disengaged, it's about active restraint. It's about choosing the exact moment when a word matters most, and letting every second before it do the work for you. Think of the difference between noise and signal. Noise is constant, desperate to be heard, full of motion and static. Signal is precise, intentional, rare. That's what silence can be. Not everything must be explained, not every moment needs to be filled. In fact, the more you fill, the less space others have to think, react, or wonder. And when they stop wondering, they stop paying attention. But silence makes them wonder. It makes them pay attention. And that attention, unspoken, focused, and involuntary, is a currency more valuable than approval. Because while approval can be requested, attention must be earned. Strategic silence earns it, not by volume, not by repetition, but by contrast, by daring to hold your ground without needing to fill it. This kind of silence doesn't say, I have nothing to add. It says, I'm choosing not to add it yet. It's not a lack of voice. It's the discipline to know when your voice will have its greatest effect. Silence used this way becomes a weapon, a screen, a shield, a trap. It draws others out while protecting your own position. It gives you time to assess, space to observe, and the advantage of unpredictability. The one who speaks first is often the one who gives away the most, but the one who waits, who listens, who watches, who only speaks when it truly matters, They shape the outcome before the outcome is even visible. So no, silence is not absence, it is strategy, it is design, it is intent, and the more intentional your silence becomes, the more powerful your words will be when they finally arrive. Not all silence is the same. In fact, the most powerful silence comes in 3 distinct forms, each with its own purpose, its own timing, its own effect. The first is information-gathering silence. This is the silence of the observer, the strategist, the one who understands that speaking too soon reveals more than it gains. When you speak first, you surrender initiative, you disclose your position, you show your hand. But when you remain silent, you create space for others to speak, and in doing so, you let them expose themselves, their thoughts, their doubts, their intentions. This is why the best negotiators wait, why the sharpest minds let others fill the room first. Because every word your opponent says is a piece of intelligence, and the one who listens the longest often ends up knowing the most. In a game of secrets, silence is surveillance. It is a net that catches careless words. The second form is authority-building silence. This is not the silence of listening. It is the silence of command. When someone in a position of influence speaks sparingly, every word gains weight. A leader who explains every decision, defends every move, and justifies every action becomes familiar, even ordinary. But one who speaks with intention, who chooses moments carefully, who leaves space for interpretation, projects strength. They are not avoiding explanation, they are rising above the need for it. This kind of silence says, I know where I stand. I don't need you to agree. I need you to understand that I won't be moved. In leadership, silence becomes a signal. It separates the noise of uncertainty from the gravity of certainty, and it allows mystique to grow in the absence of overexposure, because the more you explain, the more replaceable you become. The third form is ambiguity, preserving silence. This is perhaps the most delicate and the most dangerous. It's the silence that protects your flexibility, that maintains multiple interpretations, that gives you room to maneuver without ever making a fixed commitment. In politics, it's the vague promise that pleases both sides. In business, it's the unspoken strategy that keeps competitors guessing. In negotiation, it's the quiet refusal to take a firm position too early. And in personal dynamics, it's the silence that lets others fill in the blanks with their own hopes and fears. This kind of silence isn't about deception, it's about preservation. When you don't clarify, you don't limit yourself, you don't tie yourself to one outcome. You remain fluid, unreadable, adaptable, and in a world obsessed with definition and certainty, that makes you powerful. These 3 forms, information gathering, authority building, ambiguity preserving, are not passive. They are tactical, they are tools, and when used deliberately, they transform silence from a pause into a plan. Most people fear silence because they don't understand its shape. But those who learn its forms, those who wield each one with purpose, find that silence doesn't just hide things, it shapes them. Silence is not just a tactic. It's a trigger, a psychological force that shapes how others think, feel, and react, often without them even realizing it, because human beings are wired to fear the void. We are creatures of pattern, of certainty, of closure. When something is left unsaid, when a pause lingers too long, when a response never comes, the mind does something remarkable. It fills the gap, it projects, it assumes, it imagines, and in doing so it reveals more about itself than about the silence it's trying to decode. This is the first psychological power of silence, projection space. Leave something unsaid, and people will start assigning meaning to it. They will interpret your silence through their own fears, their own desires, their own expectations, and more often than not, they will show you exactly where they're vulnerable. That's why skilled interrogators let silence do the work, why seasoned negotiators wait through discomfort, because people will say far more in response to nothing than they ever will to a direct question. The second psychological effect is conversational dominance. We often think that the person who talks most is in charge, but it's usually the opposite. The one who speaks least is perceived as higher in status. Why? Because silence suggests self-containment. It implies that you are not seeking approval, that you're not trying to win validation, that you are already certain enough to withhold. In every interaction, there's an unspoken question. Who needs the other more? The silent person flips that question on its head. They suggest, I don't need you to understand me, you need to figure me out, and that shifts the entire balance of power. The third effect is mystique. Human perception is driven more by what we can't fully see than by what we clearly understand. Mystery amplifies power. The leader who speaks only in final decisions appears more decisive than the one who narrates every step. The strategist who never reveals their process is seen as more intelligent than the one who over-explains. The less you reveal, the more others believe you might know. Silence doesn't just obscure weakness, it enhances perceived strength. It gives your presence a gravitational pull, and that pull keeps people orbiting around you, trying to guess your intent, trying to earn your clarity. Most people underestimate the psychological weight of what they withhold, but when used with care, silence becomes not just a communication technique, it becomes a presence, a signal of control, of strength, of awareness, not because you're hiding, but because you're listening, watching, calculating, and deciding exactly when and if to speak at all. Every word you speak is a decision, a commitment, a window, and every unnecessary word is a risk you didn't need to take. That's the hidden cost of speaking too much, not just that others hear you, but that they see through you. The more you talk, the more you explain, the more of yourself you place on the table, and with every explanation, every clarification, every impulsive response, you give away something you may not get back. Leverage. The first cost is commitment. When you say what you intend to do, you trap yourself in that intention. You create expectations. You build a future that others now expect you to walk into, whether or not it still makes sense. And if you change course, they don't see it as adaptability, they see it as inconsistency or weakness. But silence avoids that trap. When you don't declare, you don't have to explain. You retain freedom. You remain fluid. You can adapt without apology. The second cost is exposure. Every time you speak at length, you reveal your thought process, how you reason, what you assume, where your limits are, and sharp listeners will collect those signals. They'll track your logic, they'll predict your moves, they'll find your blind spots. What you think is clarity may be ammunition, and what you consider honesty might become someone else's blueprint for outmaneuvering you. The third and most subtle cost is the erosion of mystique. When everything is explained, nothing feels rare. When every motive is revealed, no decision feels decisive. And when every emotion is shared, no presence feels composed. The person who constantly shares loses something irreplaceable, presence without effort. The kind of presence that comes from restraint, from being just out of reach, from making others work to understand you. The more visible your thoughts, the more ordinary you become. And ordinary doesn't command respect, it competes for it. There's a reason the most powerful people in any room tend to say the least. It's not because they lack ideas, it's because they understand the cost of expression. They know that silence holds value where words can only spend it. So, yes, speaking can be powerful, but only when it's rare enough to matter, only when it's used with precision, and only when the silence around it makes the sound impossible to ignore. We've been told that transparency is a virtue, that openness is authenticity, that sharing everything makes us trustworthy, real, and relatable. But what if that's not true? What if our obsession with being seen, understood, and constantly available isn't empowering but weakening us instead? That's the trap of transparency. The idea that more visibility equals more credibility. But in reality, too much visibility turns strength into vulnerability. It makes you readable, predictable, manipulable. When you tell the world your intentions, they no longer belong to you. When you reveal your doubts, your critics weaponize them. When you overshare your process, your competitors reverse engineer it. What's left for you to control once everyone else holds the blueprint? Transparency feels noble, but it often becomes self-betrayal. It binds you to old promises, limits your future moves, and invites judgment before you've even acted. And once you're judged, your flexibility disappears. You either follow through or look like a fraud. But silence avoids that entire dilemma. It doesn't lie, it simply withholds. It preserves optionality. It gives you time to see what others don't. And when you do speak, you choose what moves the game forward, nothing more. We think people respect those who share everything, but more often they respect those who speak with intention, who hold something back, who don't need constant affirmation or validation. And that restraint, that silence, signals more confidence than any speech ever could. In professional settings, transparency becomes overexposure. The employee who shares unfinished ideas too early, the manager who outlines every step of a still-forming strategy, the executive who reveals uncertainty in moments that demand resolve. In relationships, it's the oversharing of emotions before they're processed, the compulsion to explain every mistake, the constant need to narrate your inner life in real time. In both, it creates fragility. It gives others too much access. And once they have that access, they stop listening carefully because there's nothing left to uncover, nothing left to respect. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present," meaning sometimes your past declarations become your present chains. Transparency, while well-intentioned, often becomes just that, a chain, not a sign of strength but of surrender. So no, silence isn't dishonest, it's strategic, it's protective. It's the choice to reveal only what strengthens your position and to keep everything else where it belongs, in reserve. Not everything needs to be said, and certainly not everything needs to be shared with everyone, especially when you're still figuring it out yourself. There's a reason the quiet ones so often win. It's not luck, it's not magic, it's not that they're hiding brilliance behind silence. It's that they've learned something others haven't. When you stop talking, you start controlling. In every room, there is always a contest for attention, for influence, for control. Most people try to win that contest by speaking first, speaking fast, speaking often. They try to flood the room with sound, to dominate with presence, to be unavoidable through volume. But the truly effective ones do the opposite. They wait, they listen, they observe. They let others reveal their hands, their fears, their needs, and then, when the moment matters, they speak, and when they do, the room goes quiet, because everyone suddenly realizes that silence was never absence, it was preparation, it was power, restrained until needed. In meetings, the person who talks the most is often ignored first, but the person who speaks only when something must be said is remembered. Their words carry weight not because they are louder, but because they are fewer. Scarcity creates value, and silence creates scarcity. In negotiations, the side that tolerates silence wins, because the urge to fill a pause is a confession waiting to happen, a rushed concession, a too-soon agreement. But silence holds the line. Silence waits for the truth to emerge without force, and in that waiting it gathers leverage. In leadership, the most respected voices are not the ones constantly explaining. They are the ones that speak with clarity, not commentary, that decide without apology, that offer direction, not discussion, when it counts, because people follow strength, and strength often speaks last. The quiet don't win because they're better speakers, they win because they don't need to speak to be heard. Their silence becomes presence, their restraint becomes authority, their pauses become pressure, and that pressure changes outcomes. It forces others to fill in the gaps, to lean forward, to anticipate, and anticipation creates attention. Not the cheap kind earned through noise, but the kind that can only be earned through gravity. The quiet ones win because they understand something simple and timeless. If you let others speak enough, they will tell you everything you need to know. And when they're done, you'll have the power to say exactly what changes everything, and nothing more. Strategic silence isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, a discipline you sharpen, a habit you choose over and over in moments where speaking feels easier, but silence feels wiser. It begins with listening, not just hearing words, but listening beneath them, listening for motive, for fear, for weakness, for uncertainty. Train yourself to listen without interrupting, without reacting. Let silence stretch past comfort into clarity, because that's where people say what they didn't mean to say, or try to unsay what they've already revealed. That's where the power lies. Then comes the second habit, withholding. Not everything you think needs to be shared. Not every idea needs a stage. Not every feeling needs a name. Learn to recognize the difference between expression and exposure. Use the moments that serve your purpose. Let others guess at the rest. Because mystery is a signal too. The third habit is detachment. You don't have to respond to everything. Not every criticism deserves your energy. Not every challenge requires your voice. Silence lets you conserve force, so when you choose to use it, it actually lands. And the final habit is control. Control of impulse, of emotion, of the need to explain yourself. The strongest people are not those who speak most clearly, but those who remain clear even when they don't speak. Strategic silence isn't about withholding truth. It's about choosing the moment when truth has the most impact. That's when silence becomes power, and power becomes influence. So the next time you feel the urge to jump in, to defend, to explain, to fill the space, ask yourself, does this serve the outcome or just the ego? Does this help me win or just help me be heard? But the ones who truly win, the ones who lead, shape, shift, and build, are those who know when to say nothing at all. And now I want to hear from you. What does silence mean to you? Have you ever watched a situation turn just because someone stayed quiet? Or because you did? Leave your thoughts, or don't. Maybe saying nothing is the most powerful thing you can do right now. Silence doesn't need to be explained. That's its greatest strength. It carries meaning without insisting on it. It creates impact without effort, and it leaves echoes long after the words have stopped. The most powerful moves in life often happen quietly, not with announcements, not with applause, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what they're doing and doesn't need to prove it. The master of strategic silence doesn't avoid speaking. They simply refuse to waste it. They don't perform for approval. They don't react for validation. They choose their moments with precision, and in doing so, they become unshakable. We live in a world addicted to noise, a world that rewards expression over reflection, speed over stillness, performance over presence. But maybe it's time to remember what silence can do. Silence can disarm a critic. It can break a pattern. It can shift a negotiation. It can build mystery, protect leverage, and signal strength without ever raising your voice. Silence can reveal more than words ever could, about others, about situations, and sometimes about yourself. It's not passive, it's not absence, it's not fear, it's design, it's discipline, it's control. So the next time the world pushes you to respond, to react, to explain, pause. Let the silence stretch. Let it do the work for you, and in that space, listen. Not just to others, but to yourself. What are you really trying to say? Is it something the world needs to hear, or something you need to know alone? Strategic silence isn't about winning argument. It's about winning outcomes. It's about making fewer moves that matter more. And in the end, it's about mastering the most underestimated force in communication, the ability to say nothing and still be heard. In a world full of voices trying to shout their way into relevance, perhaps the most radical thing you can do is this: whisper when others scream, wait when others rush, stay still when others panic, and let your silence speak with more gravity than their words ever could. You don't need to be louder to be stronger. You just need to be quieter, with intent. And when you finally do speak, make sure the world listens. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's a message, and now you know how to use it.